Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast. I'm your host, Todd Taskey. We have a new series that we're doing called Founder Questions. And I'm taking one specific question. I'm asking a bunch of founders and I'm putting them all in a row so that you can get rapid fire answers to questions that I get most often. Today's question: do I have a boss? Now that the transaction is closed, do I have a boss? How much will my life change? You've got a bunch of answers from founders. I'm going to jump right into those answers. But first, I'm going to thank the sponsors for this podcast, the folks at Fiscal Advocate. Fiscal Advocate is a financial services company that helps founders organize their financials in a way that a guy like me can get maximum value and close a successful deal. It gives you dashboards to run your business on, the most important metrics, compares you to other agencies. Really something to check out. So I want to say thanks to our sponsors at Fiscal Advocate, and I hope you enjoy this episode. If you have questions of your own, reach out and we'll put them on a future episode. Thanks and enjoy the episode. Okay, this is John Morris. I'm starting with question number one. John, happy to have you participating in this series with me. You did a really good transaction a bunch of years ago and you sold Rise. Question that I get all the time is, now that I've done this transaction post-close, do I really have a boss, and how much has my day-to-day changed? How would you answer that?
So the reality is that once you sell and you no longer own majority of your business, you absolutely have a boss. Like they, in my scenario, Rise was an independent company with a board after the acquisition. But at the end of the day, they could fire me at any moment in time. And so I had to perform just like you would as an employee. And so, yeah, once you don't own 50.1% of the company and someone else owns 50.1% of the company or more, you are officially an employee of that company and no longer your own owner or your own boss.
And did you feel like you were treated like an employee or more like a C-level executive or maybe more like a partner?
Quad, who bought Rise, was amazing. And I absolutely felt like I still had full control of Rise. We would meet at a quarterly board meeting, and in those board meetings, the main recommendation was come with an ask. So they're there to help you, and they want you to come and ask for specific guidance or help to run the business. But I had guardrails. It was like there were certain, like we had an operating agreement, and I couldn't make investments over a certain dollar amount. I couldn't hire anyone over a certain dollar amount. But as long as I didn't do like those two things, I could pretty much do what I was doing before in terms of running the business.
And then you also had an employment contract from the transaction itself that protected you from being dismissed without cause and things of that nature, I assume.
Exactly. Yep. So I had an employment agreement, and in exchange for certain rights I had a non-compete for a while, so that if I chose to leave, I was going to stay away from, the agency world. For me, it was 2 years, was my non-compete. I also just in general, it's just kind of my philosophy, but, these guys have been really good to me. So the last thing I want to do is anything that would harm them in any way. So
sure.
The spirit of the relationship, even today, I still wouldn't do anything that would impact Quad or Rise in any way negatively.
Good to know. John Morris from Fiscal Advocate, thank you for participating.
Absolutely.
Matt Sunshine from CSS. Question for you, which I think is interesting based on your history. But the first question is, do I have a boss now? post-transaction. We did a really good transaction together. You partnered with a very good private equity group. You're still the CEO. You've actually done an acquisition. You're looking into others. So the question to you would be, do I really have a boss now, and how much has changed?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my situation prior to doing the deal with private equity 2 years ago is I had a partner. And so, I would regularly share and keep my partner in up to date on decisions that were being made that I was responsible for. So now that partner is no longer with the company. He was able to exit. And I have my private equity partner. So no, I don't have a boss. I make the decisions. I remember early on, first 90 days, I was having to make a staffing decision. And so I reached out to them and said, hey, is this something I need to run by you? And they were kind of like, no, I mean, you run the company. Those are your decisions. You don't need to run that by us. We're certainly here if you want to talk and you need an extra set of eyes. You want a sounding board, but no, that's really your decision. So no, I wouldn't say that I have a boss as much as I have some partners that really care about growing the business and are in really good alignment with me on the vision.
Has there been significant changes to reporting or finance or HR or anything like that?
No, not significant. I would say that we're a little bit more buttoned up because now whenever you take on investors, you need to make sure that there are monthly reports that are exactly the same every single month. So there's some standardization that came with that. Honestly, I wish we would have been operating that way even before we had private equity involved. It's just a much better way to operate the business and run the business and prepare it for growth.
Those are great comments, Matt. Thank you. With a sister company and your partners a few years ago. So your answer to question number one is going to be interesting and different from others. After the transaction, do you have a boss now?
Right. Yeah. Well, the obvious answer is yes, of course. But that's not necessarily so. It really depends on how you position yourself in advance of going to market. For example, as you mentioned, Todd, my most recent sale, I had built a solid executive team and had moved myself into the executive chairman role, being non-operational, and doing that a year or two in advance of going to the M&A market. And that allowed me to move directly into my next startup, which I had already started to hatch, and do so right when that acquisition closed. So that's how that process went through. But again, it requires you thinking that through up front and positioning yourself. That's not always possible. So you're going to have a new boss and a new job.
Yeah, and I would say for those listening, if you want to, because you did a really good job bifurcating the business, and then we sold one, and then you went on to run the other, and that episode people can go find in the history if they just look up in the search bar here on the podcast. So, Mike, thanks for your feedback on that question.
You bet.
Lance Hollander, a multi-time exiter, and now working on your next venture. I was hoping you could help answer the question, once you do a transaction and you're focused with that group on the second bite, what I hear from people often is the concern, I'm going to have a boss now. Can you answer that question? Do you have a boss now? And maybe elaborate a little bit, what's it like after transaction?
Sure. You absolutely have a boss now. That's the bad news. The good news is you might like them. But your opinion is not the one making the final decision. You're no longer driving the car. You are in the car and someone else has the wheel. it's important to get a really good sense of who that person is before you dive in.
And how collaborative is that process versus, you're, just taking orders?
I've had both sides, to be honest. I've had really collaborative partnerships where they've seat at the table and I'm brought in on a ongoing basis. I've had another situation where I sold to two brothers who had inside baseball every night that you had no insights to. It's important to really figure out who these people are, what their values are, and I'd honestly, check a couple personal references as it relates to the current management team, and ask the current management team, what's it like to work for Bob, Dave, or Susie, whatever their person's name is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's great perspective. Lance, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Welcome, Aaron Sigich. So happy to have you from Perform CB. I want to ask questions that we get asked a lot from listeners on Second Bite podcast. And the one that comes up almost every time is, do I now have a boss? Now, your story is a little bit interesting because you started out as an entry-level employee, grew to CEO. So I guess at one point in there, you kind of didn't have a boss, but now you've done 2 transactions with private equity. So help people understand maybe how to think about, do I have a boss? Do I have a partner? How much has my life changed post-transaction?
Yeah. I think in the best case scenario, you have a partner or a group of partners, right? People who are bringing perspectives to the business that you didn't have, who have seen things that you haven't seen because you've been so focused on building up your business. But the truth of the matter is, yeah, you do have a boss, right? And depending on how much of the company you sell is how much say you have. But hopefully you sold the business because you think that there's something bigger and better out there for the company and that you found some good partners to help you take that company to the next level.
And how much input or interaction or decision-making do you have strategically, and how much do you have day to day?
Yeah, I'd say from a day-to-day perspective, you should still be the one running the show. And that's always been my experience. What is the culture like? What are the policies like? How do you want to interact with the teams? How do you want to manage clients? They really should be relying on you or whoever is in that CEO seat to drive that. Otherwise, why do you have a CEO? From a big picture strategic perspective, that is where I think you lean on the partners to help you just have additional perspectives. And again, I've been fortunate in that I've never been presented of, you need to do X, and we don't care if you disagree with it. Typically, it's been, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? We've seen it this way. Let's all work together to figure out what a good strategic move forward is.
And you've had 2 private equity partners, one much larger than the first. Is there a difference in their approach that you would attribute to size, or is it all style?
Actually, our first PE firm was larger than our second PE firm in terms of number of employees and team size. Fund size, I think they're somewhat comparable. Definitely differences in style. I would also equate that to the stage of the company. So our first acquisition, we were a carve out. And so it was important that we built out all of the back office functionality. And we were very focused on acquisitions. And so that is where the PE firm really leaned in and provided their expertise. They helped us with executive recruiters. They helped us vet our CFO. And they helped us think about, how to think about an acquisition, right? And then our second PE firm, more industry specific. So they, focus on media, marketing, and technology. And that's been great because it's helped us think about go to market, more specific organic growth things. And so I think when you're thinking about who you want your partner to be, you should think about what, aside from capital, what is the other party bringing to the table for you?
Great feedback, Aaron. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Stavitsky from Barrington Media. Peter, you built over many, many years a very successful media company. And then you did a great transaction with private equity. Question that is on most people's minds is, now that I've done this transaction, Do I have a boss? Do I have a partner? Do I continue to have free reign? What was your experience like?
Well, the short answer is you do have a boss, but operationally speaking, I think it's okay to view it as you have a partner, because you do. Now, as an entrepreneur, you really have three hats, right? You're an entrepreneur, you're a manager, and you're a shareholder. And so definitely as a manager, you have a boss now. And so you're going to be reporting into a board, and you're going to have quarterly board meetings, and so you do have a boss. However, remember, private equity invested in you and your business because they saw something in you and saw something in business that they liked. And so, your job now is to continue to grow the business and, serve the shareholders well. You're a shareholder, hopefully too, if you rolled equity, and you're still there for your clients and your employees and for private equity. So it's okay to view it as a partnership. But the truth is you do have a boss, and particularly on the management side, it's okay to go through a process of, especially for me, I was 17 years without a boss. So you kind of get used to free reins, and hopefully as long as the business continues to do well, you have free reins, going forward as well.
And what do you think was the biggest thing for you to adjust to post-transaction?
I think the biggest thing was, the whole transaction of making sure clients are okay, making sure employees are okay, making sure that the shareholders are okay. We hit COVID, immediately after the deal, and so we had nervous bankers that had just closed the deal, and then we hit COVID. Although luckily we did well, anyways, despite that. But there's just a lot of emotional. There's a lot of drain. You spend a lot of time to put a transaction together, and so you're pretty exhausted as you come through the process, and so just a lot of emotion, but you just keep doing what you do every day, and try to put that aside and just keep going as you always have as an entrepreneur.
And you have about 4 years now of hindsight and perspective. What do you think was the biggest value add that they brought, your partner?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't have done any acquisitions. I hadn't done any. So I hadn't done any acquisitions in 17 years. And so really, bringing in that discipline. We also ran the business on a cash basis for 17 years. We moved to accrual. We sort of needed to do that at our size anyways. It's really important to bring a good CFO in and somebody who's going to, work with private equity and keep them, apprised of the numbers and what's happening, because that's obviously very important to them. So, all those things sort of mature as you go. But the value for me particularly was, I think it was good. Having a board does make you accountable. It makes you probably plan a little bit more, put more procedures and processes in place, start doing, contingency planning, succession planning, all the things that, you sort of kind of put aside, as a pure entrepreneur. You're becoming more corporate, more disciplined than ever before. So I think it's in many ways, it's something to look forward to.
That's helpful insight, Peter. Thank you. Lindsay Frey from Demand Drive. So happy that you're joining us for this episode. My question that I want to pose to you that I get all the time, you did a really great transaction a couple years ago, so you've got good hindsight now. The question is, do I have a boss? Post-close, you got a bunch of cash, you have a bunch of equity, you're moving forward, building a bigger business. Do you have a boss?
So the short and probably annoying answer is yes and no. And I can only speak to kind of the experience that I've had, but it's a great question. And quite frankly, one that I sort of was asking myself when my business partner and I went through the transaction a couple years ago, like you said. I have been really fortunate, and what I was hoping to get out, or one of the things I was hoping to get out of the private equity transaction, was more of a strategic partner and someone who we could turn to for guidance, insight, kind of best practices. My business partner and I, this was our first company. We hadn't bought and sold a bunch of companies, and it was, really he and I, if we had to make a decision around something, it was he and I. There wasn't really anyone else to turn to. So what has been great about the Everlane team is that we have been able to leverage them and their expertise when we need them. But it does not feel like, I guess, short answer, it does not feel day to day like I have a boss. Everything else, I'm still operationally running the business. I still can make strategic decisions. It doesn't feel like I'm day to day answering to anyone. But I have a partner and someone who I can turn to when I need to.
So let me slice that in half. Operational decisions. I would imagine you guys meet once a quarter, once a month?
So we have quarterly board meetings, but then we'll certainly chat with them and talk with them more often, but they're always there if we need to meet up.
So operationally, you will tell them, or it'll come up, or you'll discuss it in a board meeting, what you're going to do with a difficult customer, where you need to hire, those kind of things. And then you just go execute on that like you've always done.
Correct.
Strategically, though, that I would imagine is a longer conversation. Do you drive that conversation based on you and Daniel and your vision for this business, or do they drive it, or is it equally distributed?
So I would say that we drive it probably, and we're sort of coming up with, hey, this is our vision. Here's what we think will work in this environment for our client base. But they will absolutely come in and either push back if they disagree on some level, or give us like things to think about. Like, hey, have you guys considered this? We've seen this work for other platform companies. And you might want to think about this, or have you thought about approaching this industry because we have some insight here? And what they've been really great about is giving us guidance as to what the next buyer is going to care about. Right. So that's what we're all marching towards now, is the second transaction. And so what is going to create value? And so, top line revenue, profit, client retention, kind of those big pillars, they will help us make decisions around with sort of the objective being what is going to be best for value creation at sort of that second transaction, if that answers your question. Hopefully.
It really does. It answers it in a great way, Lindsay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Andrew Kalidas from Digital Impulse, now a part of Demand Drive. You had a really good transaction, and you talked about on your podcast episode how this was accelerating your own plan. The question I have, though, that I get often, now that you're post-transaction, do you have a boss? Is that the right way to think about it?
No, it's a really good question. I think everybody asks themselves that exact question during the process. Honestly, it doesn't feel that way to me at all. I think it feels like more of an accountability structure, which I think we all need at the end of the day. So for instance, when you're not reporting your numbers, when you're not reporting how things are going, sometimes I think somebody could get naturally lackadaisical, or just say, hey, we'll push things to another month. And if you want to create some positive change, maybe you delay a plan a little bit to see how things shake out. I think with an accountability structure, which is a good thing, when you are reporting on certain metrics, you're razor focused on performance. That just kind of jolts you into quicker action with things that are important to the business, which at the end of the day helps promote growth and protect your team and help modernize your product. So I think I would look at it as more of accountability than a boss. I think, especially in our transaction, they want entrepreneurs. They want people who are actually running their own business. So we have more partners and accountability. That's the direction I would point people in.
And what would you say is the most noticeable difference in your day-to-day activity?
That's a great question. I think that you also absorb some greater platform responsibilities because you're building something greater that needs to be integrated with multiple parts. But I think that's a really fun piece. You got to look at the performance of what your aspect or division of the business overall is doing, but you are thinking about how your business fits into a greater puzzle and how you fit into a greater puzzle, how your people fit into a greater puzzle. So I think being a natural entrepreneur, building is exciting. So those are a couple additional responsibilities. And then you have to figure out the cadence of how much time do you spend on each, which is probably completely dependent on the platform and the role that you're assuming.
That's great insight, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, second bite, Founders Question Series. I'm with Kevin Biondi from Sproutward. Kevin, you did a really nice transaction with the people at Power Digital maybe 18 months ago or so. And you and your partners are all on board, still working with Power Digital, took some in cash, some in equity. The question that comes up a lot is post-transaction, do I have a boss now? Am I still autonomous? Is it more of a partner? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things I've been pretty lucky on. I look at it two different ways. Is one, I mean, in the technical sense, absolutely, we do have a boss, and we're working with the team. But it's, part of the things we fleshed out in the conversation with Power Digital was they wanted us to be partners in this, right? They're looking for, as you're going through a transaction, we're part of the executive team. We work very closely with the team. And I'm fortunate that I have an amazing boss. The guy's incredibly smart and very, has helped me kind of hone my craft. So yes, absolutely we do. I would also say is as an owner, I always felt like I had a boss. I felt like I had 100 bosses because you're responsible for absolutely everything. And, whether it's you're dealing with the government, whether you're dealing with your accountants, whether you're dealing with clients, whether you're dealing with employees in your leadership team, I think it's one of those things it's all kind of how you look at it, because you've got to be able to run the business and work with your partners and coexist. And so I think that's when you're doing your diligence of the transaction, it's really making sure there's a cultural fit that you're going to fit within that organization.
On a day-to-day basis, what was the first adjustment that you had to make where you noticed things were different?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece is just kind of understanding as you're moving into a larger organization, just understanding the process. And that's frankly one of the reasons why we chose our partner was we weren't as strong as the process, and we knew if we were going to have even more scalable business, we need to get tighter on that. So I think that was one of the things of just getting used to kind of the process of being with a larger company and working with the different organizations.
Kevin Biondi from Sproutward, thanks for that input.
Sure.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.